Deep in the cave, Felicia tried her best to keep James from slipping into death. Felicia felt him slipping in and out of death. She didn't know what to do. She didn't have any bandages to cover James's injuries. The only way she knew how to heal him was to give him some of her blood. Felicia didn't know how much blood James would take from her. Felicia picked up the wooden stake, and she slowly moved it towards her wrist. Just then, the protonic field around James's body disappeared. James slowly moved his hands to show a sign of life. Felicia put the wooden stake down on the ground. She slowly moved forward towards his face. James popped up as he opened his mouth and went towards Felicia's neck. Felicia had known that this might happen, but she knew that it might save him. James stopped about 2 inches from her neck's main vein. He pushed Felicia away as he put his hands into fists.
I can't believe what I almost did.
Felicia looked at James, trying to figure out why he didn't bite her to drink her blood. James looked up at Felicia, and his heart and mind knew who she was. James's eyes widened.
Did I almost drink your...
Felicia replied.
Yes.
James put his face into his hands.
I can't believe I almost drank your blood.
He whispered.
I almost killed the one I loved.
Felicia's ears went straight up.
You love me?
James was surprised that she heard him.
Yes. We met each other back at the orphanage. If you remember the kiss you felt on your lips when we woke up, it was me who gave it to you. I fell in love with you ever since then.
Felicia remembered the kiss that she'd felt.
So, it was you who gave me my first kiss?
James replied.
Yes.
He looked at the ground, hating what he'd become. Just then, James saw Felicia's paw go under his chin. Felicia picked up his face.
This is my way of thanking you for the kiss.
Felicia kissed James on the lips as she moved her paw behind his head. James gave into her kiss and moved his right hand onto her back. James closed his eyes as Felicia pulled herself away from his body. James slowly opened his eyes, breathing hard. Felicia smiled.
So, how was I?
James was speechless and couldn't think of anything. Felicia laughed.
Looks like I was very good if you can't talk.
James replied.
You could say that again.
Felicia put her right paw on his chest.
I never felt a great love for someone, not even John. But there's one thing I need to know.
James replied.
And what's that?
Felicia answered.
Your name.
James smiled, showing his fangs.
My name is James.
Felicia replied.
It's nice to meet you, James. My name is Felicia.
James answered.
You have a lovely name, Felicia.
Felicia blushed.
Thank you, James.
She moved her paw down James's chest. James took in a hard breath as he felt a slight movement in his stomach. Felicia gently pushed James onto his back. When James was fully on his back, Felicia lay next to him and put her head on his chest.
You need rest.
James replied.
You're right.
James slowly closed his eyes and fell asleep. Felicia knew that vampires didn't have a heart, so she didn't expect a beating heart in him. Just then, there was a little thump in his chest. Felicia dismissed the thump in his chest. That was until his heart started to beat. Felicia was surprised to hear a beating heart in a vampire. She listened to the rhythm of his heart. She started to fall asleep to the rhythm of his heart. As the sun slowly rose into the sky, John, Hsien-Ko, and Mei-Ling entered the cave to find Felicia sleeping on top of James's chest. John put his head into his right hand. Hsien-Ko looked at John.
Looks like someone found a boyfriend who's deadly.
John replied.
Let's just wake her up.
John walked to Felicia. He put his hand onto her side and shook her. Felicia slowly opened her eyes. She jumped up to her feet.
John, you're here early.
John sighed.
I was worried that vampire we saved would hurt you. But looks like you fell in love with him instead.
Felicia replied.
You don't understand, John. He's not what he seems to be.
Hsien-Ko went to James's left side and looked at his injuries. She looked at John.
It's puzzling how he's still alive with the blood loss that he suffered. What's also puzzling is that he didn't drink Felicia's blood if she was so close to him.
Mei-Ling knelt down next to her sister.
By the signs of his injuries, he didn't feed himself, not even once.
Jean looked at Felicia.
If you felt like having a full meal, all you had to do was bite you when you fell asleep.
Felicia slapped John.
He's not like that!
Mei-Ling and Hsien-Ko looked at each other, stunned. Felicia turned her back on John.
If you can't trust him, I want you to leave.
John rubbed his left cheek.
You know I don't trust any vampire, Felicia. But I will give him a chance.
Felicia replied.
Thank you, John.
Felicia went to James's right side as John shook off the effect of Felicia's slap. Felicia put her right paw on James's right cheek.
It will be okay. My friends are here to help you.
Hsien-Ko looked at John.
I need you to get our truck. Get a bottle with green liquid.
John replied.
Okay, Hsien-Ko.
Hsien-Ko looked at Felicia.
So what's the deal with you and this vamp, Felicia?
Felicia smiled.
Well, we met each other in the garden in the back of the orphanage. He gave me my first kiss.
Mei-Ling replied.
That's a funny way to fall in love.
Hsien-Ko answered.
You're the one that should know.
Mei-Ling replied.
I shouldn't be talking if I was you, Hsien-Ko.
Felicia watched as Hsien-Ko and Mei-Ling pushed each other playfully. She sighed.
Anyway, he told me that he was sorry for trying to drink my blood twice.
Mei-Ling replied.
At least he said he was sorry.
Felicia answered.
But that's not the point. The point is that I think I love him.
Hsien-Ko replied.
We know how you feel, Felicia. Me and Mei-Ling fell in love with the same man.
Mei-Ling answered.
Too bad for us that he never knew that we love him.
Hsien-Ko replied.
We agreed to tell him the next time we saw him.
Felicia answered.
And who's this lucky guy?
Mei-Ling blushed.
Well, his name is Van Lai. He's a general of humans' armed forces.
Felicia replied.
You two are in love with a human general?
Hsien-Ko answered.
And is there a problem with that?
Felicia replied.
Not at all. But has he seen you two before?
Mei-Ling answered.
Yes, we met him back in Canada. He also invited us back to his base. He had the lieutenant colonel guard the dining room while we used it.
Felicia replied.
What was the name of the lieutenant colonel?
Mei-Ling retraced her thoughts.
His name was James.
Felicia replied.
That can't be!
Hsien-Ko answered.
But it is, because he introduced himself as Lieutenant Colonel James. He even showed us his ID card.
Felicia replied.
You don't understand.
Felicia pointed at James.
For you see, his name is James.
Mei-Ling looked at James.
Well, the James we met was handsome. I'm not trying to say anything against your newfound love, but the James we met was human.
Just then, John came into the cave holding the bottle with green liquid. He was breathing hard.
Sorry for taking too long, but I had to look through all these boxes before I could find this bottle.
Mei-Ling stood up.
That's okay, John. We passed the time with girl talk.
John replied.
I don't like the sound of that.
Felicia answered.
Don't worry, John. We didn't talk about you.
John handed Mei-Ling the bottle.
And that's what worries me.
Mei-Ling handed the bottle to Hsien-Ko.
Felicia, open his mouth, please.
Felicia replied.
Okay.
She opened James's mouth as John sat down to watch Mei-Ling and Hsien-Ko heal the vamp. Mei-Ling sat down next to James's head. She put her hand under his head. When Hsien-Ko opened the bottle, Mei-Ling slowly brought up James's head. Hsien-Ko put the edge of the bottle to James's lips and tilted the bottom of the bottle. The green liquid slowly poured into his mouth. Hsien-Ko tilted the bottle back and closed it. Mei-Ling looked at Felicia.
The medicine will heal his injuries, but it will not stop his thirst for blood.
Felicia replied.
I'm happy as long as he is okay.
Hsien-Ko stood up and left the cave to put the bottle back in their truck. Felicia took James's right hand in her paw and kissed it. Just then, James's injuries started to heal. Felicia watched as his body came back to life. James's chest started to move up and down, showing that he was alive. Mei-Ling stood up and dusted herself off. Hsien-Ko ran back in.
Hey guys, we have company.
Felicia stood up and ran to the opening.
You should see this, John.
John stood up and walked to the opening of the cave.
Those are U.S. Marines. What are they doing here?
Mei-Ling walked to them and looked at the Marines that were heading towards the beach. Mei-Ling looked at her sister.
Get ready, Hsien-Ko. We might have to fight our way out of here.
John replied.
I don't think that would be a good idea. The U.S. Marines are the best trained in the armed forces.
Felicia answered.
That doesn't answer what they're doing here.
Mei-Ling remembered something.
Maybe they're here to get him.
John replied.
But what would they want with a vamp?
Hsien-Ko looked at James.
He might not be a normal Darkstalker vamp. He might actually be one of them.
Felicia walked to James.
So he is a lieutenant colonel that guarded you two without fear.
Mei-Ling replied.
Come to think of it, he almost looks like the lieutenant colonel that we met back in Canada.
Hsien-Ko answered.
But what will they do to him when they find him?
Mei-Ling looked back towards the approaching boats.
We just have to find out.
Hsien-Ko replied.
I hate it when we only have one choice.
Meanwhile, back at the Felicity's House of Orphans, a tall man in all black, with the hood of his jacket covering his face, stepped into the confession box. Father Joseph was on the other side of the window in the box.
Tell me all of your sins, my son, and you will be forgiven.
The man replied.
How can you give someone like me forgiveness when you yourself have a dark heart, Father?
Father Joseph answered.
God forgave me for what I have done, and he will also forgive you.
The man replied.
Is that the lie you tell yourself every day, Father?
Father Joseph answered.
My son, it is your lies that keep you in the dark.
The man smiled evilly.
So it's true. You do reflect your own sins onto others.
Father Joseph didn't answer, for he knew that what the man said was true. The man stood up from his seat.
Killing you would make this world a better place.
When Father Joseph heard this, he stood up and tried to get away from this man he'd never met until now. The man's hand went through the window and grabbed Father Joseph's neck. Father Joseph was picked right off the floor. The man pulled Father Joseph through the wall that was separating them. Father Joseph was now bleeding.
My God, help me!
The man laughed evilly.
God cannot help you, for it is too late.
The man took off his hood.
Remember that it was I, the great TJ, who sent you to meet your God.
TJ crushed Father Joseph's neck, killing him in a second. He let go of the father and put his hood back on. He walked out of the confession box and left before anybody noticed him. Back at the beach, the United States Marines 5th Infantry Team and the 828th Battalion had reached the beach. They were heavily armed, had armor coming in by air, sea support, and air support. They looked like they were going to war, and not on a search and rescue mission. The LSD slowly approached the beach with one M1A. The bow of the LSD slowly hit the ground, making a platform for the M1A. The M1A's tracks moved its heavy, armored body onto the beach. Another LSD slowly reached the beach with a Humvee, with a 1-star general mark on its front. Its bow slowly hit the ground, making a bow for the Humvee. The Humvee moved on to the beach. It stopped next to the M1A, and the driver got out and marched to the passenger side door. When he opened it, out stepped General Lai. General Lai looked around the beach. Barely looking out of the cave's opening was Hsien-Ko and Mei-Ling. When they saw General Lai, they started to get happy. Hsien-Ko and Mei-Ling held each other's hands and jumped up and down. Felicia looked at them.
And why are you two happy?
Mei-Ling answered,
Because General Van Lai is here. Our lover has come to us. At last.
John shook his head.
He's not here for you two. He's here to get the vamp.
Felicia got mad at John.
His name is James, John.
John didn't answer her and just crossed his arms. Mei-Ling looked back outside and remembered that their truck was parked next to the cave.
I forgot to move the truck.
John replied.
Well, we're in trouble now, girls.
Hsien-Ko answered.
Why not just go to them and say we're taking care of James?
John replied.
Oh, that would be nice. And in a second they would open fire on us.
Felicia answered.
We can't just wait here, John.
John replied.
That's true. That's why we're gonna approach them with caution.
Mei-Ling thought about it and answered.
Good idea, John.
John replied.
Then let's approach them, but be cautious when we do.
Felicia looked at John.
I'll stay behind and look after James.
John started to go out of the cave.
Okay, Felicia.
Hsien-Ko and Mei-Ling followed John out of the cave. Felicia walked to James's right side and took his hand in her paw. She sat down next to him and looked at him with a smile on her face. She felt so close to him, but yet she felt that there was something that he needed to deal with before he could actually give her all his love. Meanwhile, on the beach, John, Mei-Ling, and Hsien-Ko were in view. They started to slowly walk towards the 828th Battalion and the 5th Infantry Team. The Marines saw them approaching and aimed their M16s at them. John was the first one to stop, but Hsien-Ko and Mei-Ling continued to walk towards them. General Lai walked in front of the 5th Infantry Team and the 828th Battalion.
Put your rifles down. I know these two. Just keep your aim on the other one.
Hsien-Ko and Mei-Ling walked up to General Lai. General Lai looked at them.
It is nice to see the both of you again.
Hsien-Ko and Mei-Ling just blushed and giggled. General Lai smiled at them.
Anyway, who's your friend?
Hsien-Ko replied.
Oh, that's John. He's okay.
General Lai answered.
Okay, put down your rifles. He's no threat.
Everybody put down their rifles and let John approach General Lai. John stopped about 2 inches from Mei-Ling.
I don't like when people threaten my life.
General Lai looked at him.
Is he also a Darkstalker?
Hsien-Ko replied.
Yes, he is.
Exo Chris answered.
I've heard of these Darkstalkers before. They kill and feed off the weakest humans they can.
John got mad at the Exo.
Then let's see what I can do to you.
John growled at him. General Lai got in between them.
That's enough!
Chris replied.
Wouldn't surprise me if he killed Lieutenant Colonel Grijalva.
John growled even louder.
You want an early grave, human?
Chris got in John's face.
Just push me, Darkstalker.
General Lai pushed John and Chris away from each other.
I said that's enough!
Chris replied.
If I didn't know better, it seems like you like these Darkstalkers.
General Lai answered.
If you have a problem, you can leave this beach.
Chris answered.
I have a better idea.
Chris quickly knocked out General Lai with the back of his rifle. The 828th Battalion and the 5th Infantry Team aimed their M16s at Chris. Chris smiled at them.
If you try and shoot me, all of you will be labeled traitors by our government.
Everybody moved their aim from Chris to John, Hsien-Ko, and Mei-Ling. The staff sergeant looked at them.
We're sorry, but what he says is true.
Chris walked past John.
If they move, kill them.
The staff sergeant replied, with some hesitation.
Yes, sir.
Chris took 2 private first-class soldiers with him and marched them to the cave. John looked at Hsien-Ko.
And this is why I don't get along with people.
Hsien-Ko and Mei-Ling didn't say anything. They just stood there. General Lai started to wake up, but he was pretty injured by the blow that Chris had given him. As soon as Chris and the private first-class soldiers reached the cave, they saw Felicia sitting next to James. Chris looked at the private first class.
You take the woman. I'll get the injured man. Then we can start looking for the lieutenant colonel.
The private first-class soldiers replied,
Yes, sir!
Felicia looked at the opening of the cave.
Something is wrong. I feel it.
She stood and saw that the 2 private first-class soldiers popped into the entrance and opened fire on her. Felicia barely jumped to safety. The private first-class soldiers moved into the cave. It was too bad that the private first-class soldiers didn't see Felicia in the shadows. Felicia jumped out and took out the private first-class soldiers with kicks to their heads. The private first-class soldiers fell to the ground. Felicia stood over them.
That's what you get for sneaking up on me.
Chris appeared behind her.
And this is for being born.
Felicia turned around to see Chris's fist fly at her. Felicia flew and fell to the ground. She landed about 2 inches from James's feet. Felicia got to her knees and tried to shake the effects of the attack from Chris. Chris stood over her with his rifle.
Good night, bitch.
Felicia looked up and saw the back of the rifle flying at her. She covered her face with her arms and screamed. A strong and powerful hand stopped the rifle about 5 inches from Felicia's face. Felicia opened her eyes and noticed that it was James's hand that had stopped the back of the rifle from hitting her face. Chris looked up at the vampire that towered over Felicia. James's eyes filled with rage.
You dare to try and hurt my love?
Chris didn't answer, for he had fear in him. James took the rifle from Chris and threw it deep into the cave. Chris tried to run from James, but James grabbed his neck and threw him out of the cave. James looked at Felicia.
Are you okay?
Felicia stood up.
Yeah. I'm okay.
Felicia and James walked out of the cave and onto the beach. The sun's light beamed down on James, and the soldiers that were keeping watch on John, Hsien-Ko, and Mei-Ling saw James, and fear ran through them. James looked at them and put his hands into fists, and turned into a human. Everybody quickly went to present arms. Felicia looked at James and noticed how handsome he was in his human form, and in his boxers. James took her into his arms.
This is what I looked like before we met.
Felicia blushed.
You're so handsome and strong.
Felicia kissed him.
I don't want you to leave.
James replied.
But I must.
When the private first-class soldiers came out of the cave, as soon as they saw James, they froze. James looked back at them.
At ease. Just go back to your platoon.
James walked over to Chris and knelt down. James rolled him onto his back.
And as for you, I'll see that you will be kicked out of the armed forces as soon as we get back to America.
General Lai finally got to his feet. James saluted him.
It's me, sir. Permission to speak freely, sir.
General Lai replied.
Permission granted.
James answered.
Why did you bring Exo Chris, Exo of the 97th Battalion's 5th Division with you?
While the general explained why he'd brought Chris with him, a shadow with red eyes watched them from a business building rooftop. The shadow looked at James with its hateful eyes.
So, you're the key. You don't look like you could destroy the human world, but yet, I sense a power that you're barely tapping into.
The shadow watched as James, General Lai, Hsien-Ko, Mei-Ling, the 5th Infantry Team, and the 828th Battalion started to leave the beach. The shadow smiled evilly.
In time, you might tap into your true power, but I'll make sure that you will never become stronger than me.
The shadow turned around.
We will meet again, Key. And when we do, I will kill you.
The shadow disappeared and went back to waiting for the right time to kill James. Back down at the edge of the seawater, James and Felicia held each other's hands. Felicia looked into his eyes.
I know that this might sound selfish, but I want you to stay.
James smiled at her.
It's not selfish if you want me to stay, because I want to stay here with you. But I can't. My country needs me, and I have things to settle back in America.
Felicia replied.
Will you come back for me, James?
James answered.
I'll come back for you, Felicia, for you see, I love you, and there's nothing that can change my mind.
Felicia pulled herself to him.
Okay, but here's a goodbye kiss.
Felicia kissed him on his cheek. James slowly pulled away and stepped onto the LSD and slowly went towards the supply ships. The end.